Hello and welcome back to Her Revenge Arc. My name is Alara, and tonight I want to share a story with you. It's a story about the weight of expectation, the quiet corrosion of comparison, and the slow, meticulous process of dismantling a lie that has defined your entire life. It is not a story of loud explosions or grand confrontations, but of a carefully placed pinprick that deflates a balloon of arrogance and deceit. It is the story of how I learned that the most satisfying justice isn't found in shouting from the rooftops, but in a single undeniable whisper of truth delivered at the perfect moment. So find a comfortable spot, dim the lights, and let me tell you about the girl they called perfect, and the proof I held that would change everything. Perfection had a name, and in my house that name was Clara. Clara was not my sister. She was, in many ways, something far more insidious. The daughter of my mother's best friend, Diana. Their friendship was one of those lifelong, ironclad bonds forged in high school and weathered through marriages, mortgages, and motherhood. My mother, Helen, and Diana were inseparable, a unit. And by extension, Clara and I were meant to be the same. A new generation of best friends, a mirror image of our mother's devotion. But a mirror can be a cruel thing. It can reflect a version of you that is warped, diminished, or, in my case, perpetually inadequate. From the moment I could understand words, the name Clara was a measuring stick against which I was always found wanting. It was never malicious, not in the way you might imagine. My mother never screamed at me that I was a failure. She never told me she wished Clara were her daughter. Her method was quieter, a slow, steady erosion of my self-worth delivered with a sigh of gentle disappointment. It began with the small things. "Oh, Alara, you've gotten jam on your dress again. Clara's mother says she's such a neat eater. Never a spot on her clothes." Or, "You're still struggling with tying your shoes?" Diana sent me a video of Clara tying perfect little bows last week. As we grew, the comparisons grew with us, evolving into monuments of my mediocrity. The first true monument was the piano. Both our mothers decided we would become accomplished pianists. We started lessons at the age of 7 with the same stern, unsmiling teacher, Mrs. Gable. Clara, I was told, had a natural gift. Her fingers, long and elegant, danced across the keys. My mother would come back from coffee with Diana, her face glowing with second-hand pride. Diana said Clara played a Mozart piece for her today, completely from memory. Can you imagine? At her age. Meanwhile, my fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I practiced, I truly did. I would sit at the old upright piano in our living room, the wood smelling faintly of lemon polish and dust, and I would force my hands to move. The notes would come out stilted, hesitant. The rhythm was a battle I was constantly losing. My mother would sit in the armchair across the room, not looking at me, but at the magazine in her lap. I could feel her listening, though. I could feel the silence when I faltered, a silence far heavier than any criticism. The annual spring recital was my personal crucible. I was 10. I had been tasked with the simple, plodding minuet. For weeks I had drilled it into my muscle memory until I could play it in my sleep. But on the night of the recital, sitting on the polished bench under the hot stage lights, my mind went completely blank. The sea of faces, my mother's among them, blurred into a single expectant entity. I placed my hands on the cool ivory keys and nothing happened. A full minute of suffocating silence passed before Mrs. Gable gently escorted me off the stage. The applause was pitiful, a smattering of polite claps meant to soothe a crying child. 2 performances later, Clara walked onto the stage. She was wearing a pale blue dress that matched her eyes, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect sleek ponytail. She didn't just play her piece, she performed it. It was a Chopin waltz, something far beyond my own skill level. Her posture was impeccable, her expression serene. The music flowed from her, effortless and beautiful. The applause for her was thunderous. That night, in the car on the way home, the silence was a physical presence. I stared out the window, watching the streetlight smear across the glass, my cheek still hot with shame. "Her mother said she practices 3 hours a day," my mother said finally, her voice flat. "That's what dedication looks like, Alara." It didn't matter that I practiced an hour every single day, a Herculean feat for a 10-year-old. It didn't matter that I tried. The only thing that mattered was that I was not Clara. This pattern repeated itself in every arena of our young lives. In middle school, there was the science fair. I spent a month meticulously documenting the growth of bean sprouts under different colored lights. My project bore a chaotic but passionate collage of charts and handwritten notes. Clara, I was later informed, had built a working model of a volcano that actually erupted with baking soda and vinegar, winning first prize. Her presentation was so professional, my mother would muse. Diana said the judges thought it was high school level. In sports, I was clumsy and uncoordinated. I preferred reading books in the shade to running after a soccer ball. Clara was the star of the school's swim team. Her collection of blue ribbons a source of immense pride for Diana, and by extension, a source of quiet disappointment for my mother. Imagine having that kind of discipline, she'd say more to herself than to me. The older we got, the more the comparison shifted to academics. This was where the legend of Clara truly solidified. She was, to hear our mothers tell it, a certified genius. Straight A's were a given. She was president of the debate club, a member of the student government, and a volunteer at the local animal shelter. Her report cards were not just documents. They were sacred texts, brought out at every joint family dinner for admiration and praise. My own grades were decent. I got A's and B's. I was a good student, but I wasn't a spectacle. I was quiet, studious. My passions were not things that could be easily displayed on a trophy shelf. I loved photography, losing myself for hours behind the lens of my father's old camera, finding beauty in the mundane things my mother overlooked. The way light filtered through the leaves of a tree, the intricate pattern of a spider's web, the tired lines on an old man's face. I also loved to write. I filled notebooks with stories and poems, creating worlds where I could be anyone I wanted, where my worth wasn't measured against someone else's. My mother saw these pursuits as nice hobbies. They were not serious. They were not what would get you into a top-tier university. Clara is taking extra AP classes, she would inform me over dinner, after I'd spent my afternoon developing film in my makeshift darkroom in the basement. She's already studying for her SATs. Her mother says she's aiming for a perfect score. The pressure was immense. It was a low-grade hum of anxiety that followed me everywhere. The worst part was that I never felt I could truly dislike Clara. On the few occasions we were forced to interact without our mothers present, she was perfectly pleasant. She was polite, smiled at the right times, and asked the right questions. But it all felt rehearsed. There was a veneer to her, a glossy finish that I could never seem to penetrate. Her perfection felt like a performance, and I was the unwilling and perpetually unimpressed audience. There was no real friendship between us. We were artifacts of our mother's relationship, two dolls set up to have a tea party who would rather be in different rooms. We orbited each other at birthdays and holidays, offering polite smiles and empty pleasantries, all while our mothers watched, beaming, at the success of their dynasty. The peak of this relentless comparison came during our senior year of high school. This was the final, most important competition, college applications. The entire year was a suffocating marathon of standardized tests, application essays, and interviews. For my mother and Diana, it was the Super Bowl of parenting. Clara, naturally, was applying to a list of Ivy League schools that read like a who's who of academic elitism. My own list was more modest, composed of good, solid state universities known for their arts and humanities programs. Clara's first choice is Yale, my mother announced one evening, casually folding laundry in the living room. Diana is so proud. They're already planning a trip to visit the campus. She glanced at the brochure for a state school that lay on my desk. The look on her face wasn't disdainful exactly. It was more like pity. It was the look you give something you've settled for. The SATs were the first major hurdle. Clara, according to the ever-reliable source of Diana, had been scoring in the 99th percentile on all her practice tests. I studied hard, I went to prep classes, and I did my best. My score came back respectable, well within the range for the schools I was applying to. I was proud of it. When my mother saw it, she offered a thin smile. "That's very good, dear." A pause. Clara got a 1580. Of course she did. A near-perfect score. Another jewel in her crown. The news was delivered not to shame me, but as a simple, unassailable fact, like telling me the sky was blue. This is what excellence looks like. This is the standard. And you, my dear daughter, are not it. The months wore on, a slow torture of waiting. Then the acceptance letters began to roll in. I was accepted to my top choice, a university with a fantastic photography and creative writing program. I was ecstatic. I ran into the kitchen, waving the thick acceptance packet. I got in. Mom, I got into my first choice. My mother hugged me, and for a moment, I felt a spark of genuine, unadulterated pride from her. Oh, Alara, that's wonderful news. I'm so proud of you. The feeling lasted for approximately 3 hours. That evening, the phone rang. It was Diana. I could hear my mother's side of the conversation from my bedroom. Her voice, initially bright and happy, slowly deflated. Oh, Diana, that's incredible. Yale? She got into Yale? Oh my goodness, you must be over the moon. Yes, Alara got into her top choice too. Yes, the State University. She's very happy. Oh, of course we have to celebrate. A party for Clara. What a wonderful idea. When she hung up the phone, the spark was gone. The atmosphere in the house shifted back to its default setting. The quiet, ambient noise of my second-place existence. My achievement had been instantly contextualized and therefore diminished. Getting into a good state school was nice. Getting into Yale was the triumph. The party was planned for the weekend after graduation. It was to be a grand affair at Clara's house, a celebration of her perfect high school career and her luminous future. It was also, I knew, meant to be the final glorious showcase of the stark difference between us. And this is where the story should have ended. With me, the perpetually second-best daughter, fading into the background at the party of the golden child, accepting my fate as the supporting character in a story that was never mine. But a few weeks before that party, something happened. A small, strange anomaly. A crack in the perfect facade. It was so insignificant at first that I almost missed it. But my life, lived in the shadow of perfection, had made me an observer. I was trained to notice the details others overlooked. And I noticed something was wrong with Clara's story. It started with a single throwaway comment, and it led me down a path that would unravel everything. The first crack was almost invisible. It appeared during a mandatory celebratory lunch our mothers had arranged for us a week after the acceptance letters arrived. We were at a sterile, overpriced cafe that smelled of focaccia bread and self-congratulation. Diana was holding court, recounting the moment Clara had opened the email from Yale. My heart was pounding out of my chest, she said, her hands fluttering dramatically. But Clara, she was so calm. She just clicked it, read it, and looked up at me with this little smile and said, I got in, Mom. So poised. Always so poised. My mother beamed as if the victory were her own. I stirred my iced tea, the condensation cold against my fingers. Clara, sitting opposite me, gave a modest, practiced shrug. I was just glad the wait was over. The whole process is so stressful. Especially those final exams, my mother added, looking pointedly at me. Maintaining your grades right up to the end is so important. Clara, I'm sure you aced them as usual. Oh, of course, Diana chirped. She's been studying non-stop. Clara smiled faintly. The calculus final was brutal, though. Professor Davies really threw us a curveball with that section on parametric equations. And that was it. The crack. It was such a small thing. A sentence that 99% of people would have heard and forgotten. But I hadn't forgotten. Because 2 months earlier, I had been in the school library, looking for a book on developing techniques for black and white film. I'd walked past a study corral where Clara was sitting with a few of her friends. They were complaining loudly about their classes. I remembered hearing Clara's voice clear as day. Thank God I'm dropping AP Calculus next semester. Davies is a nightmare and I don't need the credit anyway. It's too much of a risk to my GPA. She had dropped the class. I was sure of it. So why was she talking about taking the final exam? It was a tiny inconsistency. A loose thread on a perfectly woven tapestry. Maybe I'd misheard her in the library. Maybe she'd changed her mind and re-enrolled in the class. It was probably nothing. But the seed of doubt had been planted. For my entire life, I had been force-fed the narrative of Clara's perfection. It was an immutable law of our shared universe. And for the first time, I had reason to believe the law might be flawed. That night, my curiosity got the better of me. My passion for photography had made me meticulous, patient. I knew how to look for things. I started with something simple: the school's online portal. As students, we had limited access, but we could see class rosters if we were enrolled in the same department. I wasn't in the math department, but I had a friend, Liam, who was. I sent him a text. "Hey, weird question. Could you do me a huge favor and check if Clara Hayes is in Davy's AP Calculus class this semester?" He replied a few minutes later. "Nope. Not on the roster." "Why?" "Just curious," I typed back. "Thanks, you're a lifesaver." I stared at my phone. So she had lied. It was a small lie, a pointless one. Why lie about taking a test? Was it just to maintain the image? To feed her mother and mine the story they so desperately wanted to hear? Felt pathetic. But it also felt significant. If she was willing to lie about something so trivial, what else was she willing to lie about? My mind went back to the SATs. Her near-perfect score. She had always been a good student, but that kind of score was exceptional. It required a level of mastery that was hard to fathom, even for a dedicated student. This is where my quiet, unserious hobby became my greatest weapon. I wasn't just a photographer. I was a digital native. I understood how the internet worked, the footprints we all leave behind. Clara, for all her supposed brilliance, was surprisingly careless online. Her social media was a curated highlight reel of her perfect life. But she was also active on various student forums and message boards. I started digging. I spent hours sifting through old posts on college admissions forums and high school help websites. I searched for her username, her email, anything that could be linked to her. For days, I found nothing but the expected. Posts asking about college dorm life, questions about essay prompts, a few complaints about cafeteria food. And then I found it. It was on a lesser-known tutoring and academic assistance forum, the kind of place where students go for help, but also where a shadier market for academic services thrived. I was searching for posts related to our high school, and I stumbled upon a thread from 6 months ago. The title was "Urgent Need SAT Proctor Help, Westview High Area." Westview High, our school. My heart began to beat a little faster. I clicked on the thread. The original post was from a user with the handle ivybound22. The post read, "Looking for a reliable and discreet proctor to take the SAT for me next month. Must have a proven track record of 1550 plus scores. Female, 17, brown hair, blue eyes, slim build. Needs to look similar enough to pass a quick ID check. Offering a very generous payment for the right person. This is a serious inquiry. Please DM for details and photo." Female, 17, brown hair, blue eyes. Could have been a coincidence. There were other girls at our school who fit that description. But the username, ivybound22, felt so Clara. It was exactly the kind of unsubtle, goal-oriented handle she would choose. The post itself was a dead end. There were no public replies, only instructions to send a direct message. The user's profile was private. But the forum had one small, crucial flaw in its privacy settings. If you knew where to look, you could see a user's recent activity, specifically which threads they had commented on, even if the comments themselves were deleted. I spent another hour figuring it out, navigating the site's archaic code. Finally, I managed to pull up a list of ivybound22's recent forum activity. Most of it was innocuous, but one link stood out. It was a link to a profile on a completely different platform. A freelance payment site, similar to PayPal or Venmo, but one that was popular with online gig workers for its anonymity. The link was to a user profile on that payment site. A profile with the username CH Services. Clara Hayes. My breath caught in my throat. It was still circumstantial. It wasn't proof. But the pieces were beginning to form a picture. A girl desperate to get into an Ivy League school. A public request for someone to take her SATs. A payment profile with her initials. The final piece of the puzzle came from a place I never would have expected. My own mother. A few days later, my mother was complaining about a charge on her credit card statement. "I don't understand," she said, squinting at her laptop screen. "There's a $5,000 charge here from something called Academic Consulting Solutions. I've never heard of them. She had recently linked her account with Diana's to a shared cloud storage for a photo album project they were working on. Sometimes their digital lives became messy and intertwined. Maybe it's Diana's? I suggested, trying to sound casual as I walked over to look at her screen. I'll have to ask her, my mother grumbled. $5,000 is an insane amount for consulting. What could that even be for? I stared at the screen. Academic Consulting Solutions. Sounded so bland, so corporate. On a hunch, I went back to the payment website where I had found the Sage Services profile. I searched for Academic Consulting Solutions. And there it was. A freelance profile under that exact name. The profile belonged to a young woman, a college student from a city 3 hours away. Her profile picture was professional, and her bio was vague, listing services like admissions counseling, essay editing, and test preparation strategy. But her profile also had a review section. Most of the reviews were generic 5-star ratings with no comments, except for one. One review left about 5 months ago, from a user whose profile was now deleted. The review said, "Absolutely the best. Worth every penny." The score was even higher than I hoped for. A true professional and looked just like the photos. Highly recommend for any high-stakes situation. Total lifesaver. The review was left right after the date of the SATs. And when I cross-referenced the transaction date on my mother's credit card statement with the date of that review, they were 2 days apart. Diana had paid this woman $5,000 right after Clara had supposedly received her miraculous 1580 score. It all clicked into place. The lie about the calculus final was a cover. She hadn't needed to worry about her GPA because her path to Yale wasn't being paved with good grades. It was being paved with the fraudulent SAT score. Diana hadn't just been proud. She had been a co-conspirator. She had paid for the lie. She had paid $5,000 to a stranger to impersonate her daughter and take the most important test of her life. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces of evidence glowing on my screen. The forum post, the payment profile, the credit card charge, the glowing review. It was a complete, unbroken chain of deceit. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. This wasn't just about a girl cheating on a test. This was about the entire artifice. The years of comparison, the endless praise, the pedestal they had placed her on it was all built on a foundation of lies. The perfect daughter was the fraud. Her perfect future was bought and paid for. I carefully took screenshots of everything. The forum post from Ivybound22. The payment profile for CH Services. The profile of Academic Consulting Solutions. The glowing review. I saved them all to a secure folder. A digital cache of dynamite. I now held the truth in my hands. The question was, what was I going to do with it? For 2 weeks I did nothing. I sat on the evidence, a secret that felt heavy and powerful in my mind. I watched my mother and Diana buzz around, planning Clara's victory party. They discussed catering, decorations, and the guest list with the gravity of generals planning a military campaign. The party was becoming more and more elaborate. A monument to a fraudulent success. During this time, I thought a lot about what revenge really meant. My first instinct was to go nuclear. To stand up in the middle of the party, project the screenshots onto a giant screen, and watch the world burn. The idea was tempting, a fantasy of righteous fury I played out in my head. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that wasn't my style. A loud, messy explosion would make me the center of the drama. It would paint me as the jealous, bitter girl who couldn't stand her rival's success. They would try to spin it to discredit me. It would become a she said nightmare. My truth would be buried under an avalanche of accusations and denials. No, the revenge had to be as quiet, meticulous, and undeniable as my investigation. It couldn't be about public humiliation. It had to be about consequences. Real, irreversible consequences. And it had to be delivered in a way that left no room for doubt, no possibility of escape. My target wasn't just Clara. It was the entire system of lies our mothers had built. It was the pedestal itself. And the best way to destroy a pedestal is to kick the legs out from under it, not to yell at the statue on top. I began to form a plan. A plan that would unfold in two parts. Part 1 was for Yale. Part 2 was for our mothers. Part 1 was simple. Yale, like all prestigious institutions, had a zero-tolerance policy for academic dishonesty. An application built on a fraudulent test score was grounds for immediate rescission of admission. They had an anonymous tip line for exactly this kind of situation, handled by their Office of Academic Integrity. I spent an evening composing a carefully worded email. I attached the screenshots as a single, compiled PDF file, each piece of evidence annotated with a brief, factual explanation. To the Yale University Office of Admissions and the Office of Academic Integrity, I wrote, I am writing to provide information regarding a prospective student for the class of 2026, Clara Hayes. I have reason to believe that her SAT score, a key component of her application, was not obtained legitimately. The attached document contains evidence suggesting that a third party was paid a significant sum to take the examination on her behalf. I laid out the evidence chronologically: the forum post seeking a proctor with Clara's physical description, the payment account with her initials, the $5,000 payment from her mother's credit card to a consulting firm, and the subsequent review praising the consultant for a high score and a convincing physical resemblance. I kept the tone of the email completely neutral. I presented myself as a concerned member of the academic community, someone who believed in the integrity of the admissions process. I didn't use my own name. I created a new, anonymous email address for the sole purpose of sending this message. There was no emotion, no hint of a personal vendetta, just the cold, hard facts. I stared at the send button for a long time. This was the point of no return. This action would detonate a bomb in Clara's life, vaporizing the future she and her mother had so carefully and corruptly constructed. Was it too cruel? Then I thought about the years of feeling small, the years of having my own passions and successes treated as quaint little hobbies. I thought about my mother's disappointed sighs. I thought about the smug, satisfied smiles on Diana's face. This wasn't just about a test score. This was about reclaiming the space I had been denied my entire life. It was about justice for the quiet, trying girl who was never good enough. I clicked send. The email vanished into the ether, a silent digital torpedo heading for the hull of Clara's perfect life. I felt a tremor of something, not guilt, but a profound sense of gravity. I had set in motion a series of events I could not stop. Now for part 2. The party. My plan for the party was more delicate. Yale would handle the official consequences, but I needed to handle the personal reckoning. I needed my mother and Diana to understand the precise nature of their creation. The party was scheduled for a Saturday evening. I knew Yale's administrative offices would be closed over the weekend. They would likely receive and begin processing my email on Monday morning. That gave me a very specific window of opportunity. The party would be the last moment of Clara's triumph, the last time she would stand on that pedestal before it crumbled into dust. And I wanted to be there to witness it. Not to gloat, but to observe. I decided I wouldn't reveal the evidence at the party. Instead, I would give a gift. I spent the next week working on it. I went through my years of photography, my boxes of negatives and prints, my digital archives. I was looking for photos of Clara. Over the years, at birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings, I had often been the unofficial photographer. My camera was my shield, a way to participate without having to fully engage. And through its lens, I had captured hundreds of images of Clara. I selected a dozen of them. They were beautiful photos, technically perfect. I had captured her in all her golden glory, blowing out the candles on her sweet 16 cake, smiling with the swimming medal around her neck, standing on the debate stage podium, laughing with her friends. On the surface, it was a collection of her greatest hits, a tribute to her perfect life. I bought a beautiful, expensive leather-bound photo album. I carefully arranged the pictures in chronological order. On the last page, I left a space. Then, I went to my computer and opened the PDF file, the one with all the evidence. I printed a single high-quality copy. The screenshots were crisp, the text clear and damning. I folded this document neatly and tucked it into a small, elegant envelope. The party arrived. Our house was filled with a tense energy. My mother was flitting around trying to choose the right dress. We have to look our best, Alara. It's a big night for Diana and Clara. I chose a simple dark green dress. I did my hair and makeup with a quiet focus. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not the resentful, overshadowed girl I had been, but a calm, composed woman who knew a secret. We arrived at Clara's house. It was even more ostentatious than I had imagined. A marquee had been erected in their sprawling backyard. Fairy lights were strung through the trees. A string quartet was playing softly in one corner. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and catered hors d'oeuvres. Diana and Clara stood near the entrance, greeting guests. They were a vision of maternal and filial perfection. Diana wore a shimmering gold dress, her face aglow with pride. Clara was in a simple but elegant white dress, looking every bit the Ivy League ingenue. She was radiant, a star at the center of her own universe. When she saw us, Diana rushed over and embraced my mother. "Helen, you made it. Doesn't Clara look like a dream?" "She's stunning," my mother breathed, looking at Clara with an expression of pure adoration. It was a look I had never once received, and for the first time in my life it didn't hurt. Simply was an observation. I walked up to Clara holding my gift-wrapped album. "Congratulations, Clara," I said, my voice even and calm. "This is for you." She took it, a flash of surprise in her eyes. "Oh, Alara, you didn't have to." "I wanted to," I replied. "It's a collection of memories." Later there were speeches. Diana gave a tearful, gushing tribute to her perfect daughter. Her genius, her discipline, her bright future at Yale. My mother stood beside her, nodding and dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. It was the grand finale of their shared delusion. I found a quiet corner and I watched. Clara open my gift. She smiled as she flipped through the pages, showing the photos to her friends. "Oh, look at this one from my 16th birthday. Alara, you're such a good photographer." She was performing. Even now, her gratitude was a performance. She was playing the part of the gracious, humble victor. She reached the last page, the one I had left empty. Tucked into the photo sleeves was the small, elegant envelope. She furrowed her brow in confusion, pulled it out, and opened it. I was too far away to see her expression change in detail, but I saw the shift. I saw her perfect posture stiffen. I saw the blood drain from her face. Her smile didn't just fade, it shattered. She snapped the album shut, her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes darted around the crowd, and for a terrifying second they met mine. In that moment she knew. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply held her gaze, my expression unreadable. I gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod that said, "Yes, I know, and this is just the beginning." She looked away quickly, turning to her mother and whispering something in her ear. Diana's joyful expression faltered, replaced by confusion and then irritation. My work was done. Part 2 was complete. I hadn't exposed her to the world. I had exposed her to herself. I had handed her the evidence of her own fraud, wrapped in a beautiful package of her own lies. She would now have to spend the entire weekend, the pinnacle of her supposed success, with the knowledge of that little envelope. She would have to smile and accept congratulations, all while knowing that the truth was sitting in her lap, and that on Monday morning the real consequences would begin. I found my mother and told her I wasn't feeling well and wanted to go home. For once, she didn't argue or compare me to the ever-resilient Clara. She was too caught up in the glow of the party. She told me to take a taxi. As I walked away from the music and the laughter, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the giddy thrill of victory. It was the quiet, profound peace of liberation. The story they had written for me was over. I was finally free to write my own. The fallout was not a sudden explosion, but a series of quiet, devastating implosions. I observed it all from a safe distance, a spectator to the demolition I had engineered. On Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after the party, my mother came home early from work. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She walked into the kitchen where I was making tea and just stood there, her car keys dangling from her hand. "Diana called me," she said, her voice a hollow whisper. "Yale rescinded Clara's acceptance." I didn't feign surprise. I just met her gaze and waited. They received an anonymous tip, she continued, her voice trembling. With evidence. That Clara didn't take her own SATs. That Diana paid someone to do it for her. She sank into a kitchen chair, her body slumping as if the bones had been removed. $5,000, Alara. That was the charge on my credit card. It wasn't mine. It was Diana's. She used our shared account to pay a cheater. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw not a judge but a confused, broken woman. How could she do that? How could she lie to me for all this time? The irony was so thick I could taste it. My mother was devastated not by the cheating itself, but by the fact that her best friend had lied to her. She had been robbed of her vicarious victory. The perfection she had worshipped, the standard she had used to measure her own daughter, had been a sham. And Clara, she whispered, shaking her head. That perfect girl. All of it a lie. This was the moment I had waited for. The moment of reckoning. I could have been cruel. I could have said, I told you so. Or, now you know how it feels. But looking at her, I felt a surprising wave of pity. She was a victim of this deception too in her own way. She had tethered her own self-worth to Diana's success, and now that anchor had been cut loose. The party, she said, her eyes widening with the fresh wave of horror. That whole party was a celebration of a lie. Yes, I said softly. It was. She finally looked at me. Really looked at me, and a new terrible understanding dawned in her eyes. She thought back to the party, to my early departure, to my strange, calm demeanor. She thought about the gift I had given Clara. The anonymous tip, she said, her voice barely audible. Was it you? I didn't answer immediately. I just let the question hang in the air between us. Then I gave a single slow nod. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. I could see a torrent of emotions warring on her face. Disbelief, anger, and a sliver of something that looked like awe. She was angry that I had torpedoed her friend's life, but she was also seeing me, perhaps for the first time, as someone with agency, with power. Someone capable of executing a plan so precise and devastating. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do that, Alara? It was a cruel thing to do. Was it? I asked, my voice still quiet, but now edged with a steel she had never heard before. Was it more cruel than being told my entire life that I wasn't good enough? Was it more cruel than having every achievement I ever made, every passion I ever had, dismissed because it wasn't what Clara was doing? You didn't just compare me to Clara, Mom. You erased me with her. You held up a fraudulent, photoshopped image of perfection and told me to be that, knowing I never could. Tears began to stream down her face. They were not the proud, happy tears she'd shed at the party. They were tears of shame. I didn't know it was a lie, she stammered. I just wanted you to be successful. I wanted the best for you. You wanted me to be Clara, I corrected her gently. And Clara wasn't real. You were so busy worshipping a ghost that you never saw the daughter who was standing right in front of you. The conversation was long and painful. It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. There were no easy resolutions, no magical hug that fixed 2 decades of damage. But it was a start. It was the first crack in the wall between us. The friendship between my mother and Diana. A bond one once thought was unbreakable, shattered. The betrayal was too deep on both sides. Diana was furious at what she perceived as my mother's betrayal in raising a daughter who would do such a thing. My mother was heartbroken by the depth of Diana's deception. They stopped speaking. The silence that fell between their 2 houses was profound. As for Clara, her life unraveled. With her Yale acceptance gone and the reason for its rescission now a whispered rumor all over school, her other college options disappeared. The story in a twisted version eventually got out. Not the details of my involvement, but the core fact. The Golden Girl had cheated her way to the top. Her perfect reputation was ruined. She ended up enrolling in a local community college, the ultimate fall from grace in her mother's eyes. I never saw her again, but I heard she was a different person, quieter, humbled, stripped of her glossy veneer. In the months that followed, something shifted in my own home. The ghost of Clara was gone. The measuring stick had been broken. My mother started to see me. She would come down to my darkroom and ask to see my photographs, her questions genuine. She read one of my short stories and told me it was beautiful. They were small gestures, hesitant and clumsy, but they were real. Our relationship is still a work in progress. A slow rebuilding of a foundation that was never properly laid. But for the first time it feels like it's ours. I went off to college that fall, to my first-choice university. I thrived. I studied photography and writing. I found my people. I built a life for myself that was defined not by comparison, but by my own passions. I learned that my worth was not something that could be given or taken away by someone else's opinion. It was inherent. It had been there all along, waiting patiently in the shadows. My revenge was not a fiery spectacle. It was a quiet, deliberate act of truth-telling. I didn't destroy Clara's life out of spite. I dismantled the lie that was suffocating my own. And in doing so, I didn't just get justice. I got freedom. The stories we are told as children can shape us in profound ways, especially the ones we are told about ourselves. For a long time, my story was that I was less than. It took discovering a massive lie to realize that the story itself was the true fiction. It makes me wonder what silent, invisible comparisons many of us live with every day. So I want to ask you, have you ever lived in someone else's shadow? Have you ever had your own light dimmed by the manufactured brightness of another? Tell me your story in the comments below. Your experiences matter, and your voice deserves to be heard. And if you found a piece of your own story in mine, please remember to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to her revenge arc for more stories of justice reclaimed. Thank you for listening.